with more Barnstable this morning. I'm Sarah Colvin, and joining me live on the phone, I welcome our Cape and Island State Senator, Dan Wolf. Senator Wolf, good morning.
Sarah, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. How are you?
Excellent, thanks.
So, Dan, we big news last week coming from Plymouth, where we heard that Entergy has made the decision to shut down the Pilgrim Nuclear power plant by 2019. Certainly, I know a cause that we have talked about numerous times, and this certainly is big news. So, tell me your reaction to Entergy's decision.
Well, I'm glad that finally, we're looking past the other side of that plant operating to the decommissioning. But of course, there are real concern about the jobs there and the families that will be impacted, as well as revenue to the town of Plymouth, as you and I have discussed. So while I applaud finally the fact that I think we're reaching sanity on this issue, there's a lot of issues to be dealt with relative to the closing and decommissioning and just settling going forward. I mean, in a universe where this had been handled more responsibly by our public officials, and I'm saying over the last 30 years, the plant never would have been relicensed 3 years ago, and we would have had the capacity filled in a very well planned and well thought out way with renewable, sustainable, and less impactful energy. So, where it leaves us now is we have to scramble to backfill the energy need, and at the same time, we need to really look at cleaning up what is a nuclear waste dump, and it's going to be one for some time to come because, again, there's nowhere, the federal government has not given us a location to move that fuel, so it's going to be stored on that site for years to come.
Absolutely, and I think that it's everyone needs to understand, and I think that most people do, that this is certainly not something you can just close the door and lock it and walk away. It's something that's going to take many years to fully decommission and fully be done. So talk to me. I know, Dan, you filed a couple of bills relative to the decommissioning of the facility. So talk to me a little bit about these bills.
Well, there's one method of decommissioning which is called safe store, which is a oxymoron from my perspective, which gives them 60 years to responsibly deal with the decommissioning and storing the spent fuel. So we really think that this needs to be expedited, and specifically moving the fuel from the wet storage tanks that it is now in, the over 3,000 spent fuel rod assemblies, moving them into a much more stable and less vulnerable storage environment, which would be dry cask, where they're encased in steel and concrete, really in tombs almost, if you will. So we have a bill that we filed that would incentivize that. It would charge a fee of $10,000 a year for any of the spent fuel rod assemblies that are not stored in the safe way. That would give them a huge financial incentive, them being Entergy, to expedite the dry casking of the fuel. The other thing that we got to deal with there is that there's about $870 million in reserve to actually pay for the decommissioning of that plant. But estimates that I've seen range anywhere up to $1.3 billion, which means there could be a significant shortfall, which could fall on the ratepayers and the taxpayers. So we've also filed legislation that would require Entergy to put an additional $25 million a year towards the decommissioning into a reserve, that if it never got used, it would go back to them. It would be like an escrow account. So those are two bills that we've filed. Sarah Peak, representative from the Outer Cape, has filed legislation relative to the emergency evacuation zone. It is important to understand, even though the plant may be shut down in either 2 or 4 years, there still does, to me, need to be emergency preparedness in case something should happen to the fuel rod assemblies that are being wet stored, because that can be a volatile situation, and that needs to be monitored, and the oversight needs to be pretty strict on that.
Indeed. When we look at the possible potential billion-dollar cost of decommissioning, excuse me, the plant, Dan, what are we looking at? Where is that? What is that money going to be spent on? Is that primarily just getting rid of those spent fuel rods?
Yeah, I mean, Sarah, it's incredible the magnitude of that plant. You and I have discussed it in the past, but 500 million gallons a day of cooling water, the magnitude and scale, the temperatures that are involved, the heat that's in there that needs to be dissipated over the next couple of decades. So what we're really looking at is first shutting the nuclear reaction down, and then bringing the temperatures down to normal and monitoring that process. And that's going to take years in itself. And then you have all the infrastructure there that ultimately and eventually needs to be disassembled. The valves, the lines, the motors, the pumps, And then finally the primary containment vessel, which is where the nuclear reaction is taking place. There's a lot of parts in there that have, that contain nuclear material, or that are or that are radioactive. Let's put it that way. That have to be put into a stable long-term storage place, because it's going to be there for a period of time. So it's a really long-term, pretty complicated process, and the money goes to payroll, but the money's going to go to a lot of the parts, and it's huge. It's almost inconceivable how big the decommissioning and disassembly of that's going to be, and it's going to take decades. So one of the things about jobs is there's going to be several hundred jobs there for years and years and years to come, just working on that.
Exactly, and one might imagine that the folks who are there running the plant now will certainly play a role in decommissioning it. So that's, I think that's definitely something to think about. I know that was one of the big concerns for those who are concerned about the closure of the plant, is what about all of the jobs that Entergy provides in the town of Plymouth?
Yeah, we had a meeting yesterday. A couple of the unions that represent members there came together for a meeting with legislators yesterday up in Braintree. Senator Warren was there. We were there, and really just take that step and start having meetings with families and counseling people on jobs, et cetera. It is important to remember these were not public sector jobs; these are private sector jobs. And from my perspective, this is a company that I wouldn't say behaved irresponsibly, but pretty close to it. If you look at their record, their reliability and their safety record, it is not a company that I would say over the last 10 years has done a great job, and their employees to some degree are paying for that now, because the reason the plant was shut down is the government started to do its job and require certain safety and operational parameters that cost more than the plant that Entergy was willing to pay, and they made a business decision to shut it down. So part of this is going to be to watch how responsibly they deal with their employees through this transition, and hopefully we can put some heat on them to do the right thing for their employees.
And of course, as we look at that, the big price tag for decommissioning that of course is going to fall on the shoulders of Entergy. But is there concern that somewhere along the line that's going to be transferred to the ratepayers, and perhaps how does that couple with meeting the energy demands that are going to be left when the plant shuts down?
Well, I think the energy demands are going to be met. One thing we've demonstrated over and over is that we are resourceful people here in Massachusetts and in America. So I have no doubt that we'll figure out how to backfill the energy need, some of which will be done with renewable, sustainable, forward-looking energy, and some of which will be done with bringing online some more gas capacity, or the safest and most environmentally friendly fossil fuel technologies, because some are better than others. So, we have to watch that. As far as the ratepayers and the taxpayers, there should be absolutely is a concern, because the money's got to come from somewhere, and ultimately it either comes from the investors at Entergy, who have a responsibility to clean it up, and that is if it goes over the reserve amount, or it's going to come through tax payments or rate payments. And I think, the question here is going to be with the Attorney General and with people on a national level, are we going to make sure that those who really are responsible, which is the company, pay this, or is it going to fall on the backs of the ratepayers and taxpayers? That's where we have to be vigilant going forward as well.
Absolutely. And so talking about moving forward, obviously you filed these two bills, and Representative Peake has filed a bill as well. Where are we in that process, and did you anticipate more bills as the legislature looks to have at least some sort of an oversight over the decommissioning process?
Yeah, the bills were filed prior to us knowing that the plant was going to be shut down. So now that we have a time frame, it's even more important that we get these bills moving, because the bills actually are more urgent than they were before, now that we do have a timeline. So I've talked to the chair of the Telecommunications and Energy Committee. We're going to look to see if we can fast track these bills somewhere. We also have to get them done over on the House side as well. So the House and Senate both have to look at these bills, hopefully pass them and get them to the governor. And again, this really is financial protection. Now that we know the plant's going to be decommissioned, it's financial protection for the taxpayers and ratepayers. And it's also part of it includes the oversight to make sure that as it's disassembled and decommissioned, it gets done right.
Absolutely. Dan, any other thoughts about this news and the process moving forward?
No, but Sarah, I've whined over and over the past number of years about this being a failure of government and government not doing its job. And so the two things I would say is this is happening because I think, especially on a federal level, the NRC and the EPA really started to apply pressure that the plant be run correctly. And I also want to do a shout out to all the people locally, both at the town level, elected officials, public safety officials in the town, and also great community civic action on this. We really did speak with one voice down here from the Cape, and I think that made a real difference in getting government to ramp it up and do its job. So I just want to applaud all those who were involved in that effort.
Wonderful. Well, Dan, I thank you so much, as always, for joining us here on Barnstable this morning. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. And we will see you on Friday at the Community Media Center for the CCYP Speaker Series.
Oh, very much looking forward to that there. Take
Absolutely.
care.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cape and Island State Senator Dan Wolf joining us this morning, as he does every other Tuesday. Going to give you a fire safety tip. We'll be back.